Canada may have a trade deal with the European Union, but the two parties are not in agreement over Alberta's oil sands. The European Union plans to label it as dirty oil. That's based on a system it uses to calculate greenhouse gas emissions from major oil suppliers. But Ottawa questions how accurate that is. The CBC's Margot McDermott explains.
The Department of Natural Resources has gone to great lengths to make this argument, and it actually hired a former expert consultants to the EU to actually look at how it actually calculates the emissions from various types of oil and to come up with this report. And what it actually did is it took a close look at the oil that's imported and produced in Europe now and sort of made some more calculations. Now, as you mentioned, the EU is proposing that oil from Alberta's oil sands be labeled dirtier because of all the emissions that are required to dig it out of the ground and refine it. This is the so-called fuel quality directive that we've spoken about before and that the Canadian government's quite upset about. Now, this report concludes that the EU's numbers are actually flawed because the EU has averaged out the emissions from the oil it both produces and imports from places like Russia, Venezuela, and Africa. And it kind of attaches a sort of one number, sort of an average number to the emissions from that oil. But the report says you can't do that, that conventional oil has many different levels of emissions, just like oil from Alberta's oil sands, and that you can't just say it's one number, it's one average. And it recommends that it actually recalculate the way it looks at its own oil. Now, all of this is sort of rolling out now for a couple of reasons. But mostly Canada doesn't export its oil to Europe now, but it sees it as a potential future marketplace. And so it's making great pains to sort of counter the argument that Alberta's oil should be labeled dirtier. The minister, Joe Oliver, is actually heading to Europe either next week or the week after to, again, make his case about the fuel quality directive. And his department wanted to have this report out and sort of circulated by then. There's something else going on, too, though. There's a big UN climate conference taking place in Warsaw, Poland. And at that climate conference, the EU is actually going to be introducing a resolution that actually says that it wants to adopt policies to stop the production or importation of high-emission oil. And it actually says, oil such as fossil fuels, such as from the tar sands. So it actually mentions Canada's oil. So it's a highly political issue and one that the government here is quite concerned about.
That's the CBC's Margot McDermott reporting from Ottawa.